Hello, everyone. My name is Lisa Phillips, and I am an Associate Professor of Interior Design at Thomas Jefferson University in Philadelphia. My topic today is closing the distance between us, providing sensory experiences to remote viewers. The presentation of material palettes is a key moment in the development of an interior design project, with feedback being given by the client as they interact with the selections in person. Many of the senses are involved as clients' fingertips stroke textures and scratch and wrap surfaces. They listen to and even smell the properties of the materials in front of them. They test them for endurance as well, pulling at them, twisting them, and holding them at a distance to ponder them. Clients are extremely interested in the materials that will be in their future environments. After all, materials are quite personal. They will touch their skin. They will initiate sound every day as shoes walk across surfaces, as knuckles rap against the surface of a door when visitors come to call. Materials may conduct heat or coolness, bringing them joy or displeasure. Materials are intimate. In the last several decades, however, a global economy has been challenging traditional communication methods in the interior design profession. Clients may be hundreds or even thousands of miles away from designers when working on remote projects. In the last year, given the pandemic and social distancing requirements, even local meetings are often conducted virtually. How can designers provide an experience that is multisensory and immersive for those at a distance in this new and challenging environment? This was the question that was on my mind as I began to work with my group of 16 interior design juniors in studio this past fall. Students were tasked with designing a tranquility pod for a user group of their choice in the local community. They could select any group in the community that they deemed to be under considerable stress that could benefit from a location to de stress and reset. The students had to consider how materials, texture, lighting, and color would affect the sensory experience in order to achieve optimal results. They were to consider the full range of sensory stimulation, since during times of isolation and introspection, the user is often keenly aware of their environment. I did set some limitations to avoid what I called cliche designs, which included banning the use of piped in sounds of nature in music and video projections. I also asked students to avoid using furniture blocks created by large manufacturers so their spaces would be more personal. I should mention that our university was hybrid during this time, and our upper level studios met 3 days a week. I worked with students to decide how many days the group felt comfortable meeting in person, and we decided 2 days online and 1 day a week in person was the ideal balance. Our critiques with outside jurors were fully online, so these replicated the challenges of presenting to distant clients. Students were told from the start that one of the key components of the project was to be a sensory interaction to engage the remote guests. Ideally, the interactions would be to be sent through the mail, so size and content restrictions were provided to students based on those guidelines, and they were let loose to decide how they best wanted to communicate their intentions. Our first step, of course, was research. We read Eyes of the Skin by Juhani Palasma and looked at precedents by Stephen Hall for atmospheric environments that focused on senses going beyond sight. How can designers increase an awareness of touch, sound, smell, and taste? The students were required to interview someone in their chosen user group as well. There were many unusual client types selected: restaurant workers, nurses, social workers, and even gym enthusiasts. Students selected local sites and visited them to create sensory maps on location. These focused on sounds heard, smells in the area, the density of people, and behaviors identified, in addition to traditional sun, wind, and view issues and opportunities. They considered how the site might affect the interior design of their intervention. The pod itself was to be a prefabricated box of approximately 15 by 15 by 15 feet, although the size could be expanded if the program would justify it. Students used an iterative process through sketching to experiment with light, color, and materiality as they designed cohesive sensory experiences. They created physical models as well, and these helped them to walk through their early concept ideations. As space planning evolved, sensory integration was always developing in tandem. During this phase, students often remained dependent on visual aspects and needed to be reminded often to include a full range of sensory stimulation. This pattern illustrates how strong the sense of sight is ingrained in a designer, how often we rely on sight to define a concept and explain the narrative of an environment. This crutch is a good one to remove, allowing students to consider the senses more holistically. 3D software was undertaken fairly early as a means to develop a visual language for the pods. This allowed students to create multiple iterations in swift succession. They worked through various exercises to experiment with light, color, and materiality choices. And since we had 1 day a week in person, students were able to select real finishes. They ordered samples and were able to visit the materials library at our campus. Our days were beneficial in working together to develop palettes. Students also consider the psychological effects of their decisions as well. Since the project was small, it allowed it to be very detailed. This is a glimpse of a highlighted project. Mary Kate's user group focused on detectives and law enforcement officers, those investigating crimes who had high stress on them. Her pod was sited in a local park, and the spaces were highly textural and featured many extremes: hot and cold, hard and soft, wet and dry, dark and light. All students developed 3D walkthroughs to take the jurors on a full visual journey through their designs. They did little to compensate for the lack of sensory stimulation, but many were quite well developed. Mary Kate's was quite successful in telling the story of renewal she intended. It was up to the students to decide the hours of their pods. Some were open 24 hours. Mary Kate's pod had a card swipe for security. The dark hallway is a strong contrast to the exterior. The red lighting and textural surfaces are almost cave like in their appearance, and the narrow corridor assists in transporting a visitor away to the main tranquility room. This pod is one of the few that stayed fairly small, only exceeding the 15 by 15 feet square footprint by a small margin. Its size, however, made it no less successful, as you can see as you approach the main room and the cheery thermal delights that await you there. At the door, a basket is set for you to take off your shoes if you decide. The area at the entry is sand, so a visitor can run their toes through the grains. There would be small rakes and tools on the wall for one to create patterns on the ground. A fireplace takes center stage, with areas to sit directly around it. There are two other opportunities to sit in the room: a corner perch and a long swing. There is also an area to wash off one's feet upon departure. The water would run continuously like a fountain, bringing in soothing sounds as well as coolness, in contrast to the heat of the fireplace. Surely one would leave this pod far better than when they entered. Going beyond the walkthrough, the students developed small physical manifestations of their senses as well. In the end, these illustrated wondrous variety. Some students developed boxes, as you can see on this slide. Others created baskets. Others used clasped specialty vessels. And then there were some that were nothing like a box. One came in a layered jar and another in a mesh bag. They all featured instructions and were specific to the project concept. This list shows some examples of the ways the senses were engaged through the sensory interactions. Sight was engaged, of course, through the inclusion of small material samples, but some odd items were included that wouldn't appear in a typical interior design presentation. Items like flashlights and Christmas lights, live plants, and a mirror. Touch is often engaged in a typical physical presentation to a client, but I can't recall one where hand warmers or handheld fans were provided to clients, or one where clients pushed down on tiny plots of live grass or splashed droplets of water onto their arms. Students evoke the sense of scent with items dabbed in essential oils by including live plants or through the scent of natural materials. One even included a bar of soap because her gym enthusiast clients would have just showered before entering the pod. Some students even added interactive elements that simulated activities that would occur in their pods, like paints and a paintbrush or a tiny rake and real sand. The one sense that was oddly difficult to convey was sound. Remember, I had banned the use of piped in sounds like nature or music, so all sounds came from materials, which proved, let's say, difficult to duplicate. Students ended up having the jurors use their fingers or other items included in the kit to scratch or tap the materials included to assist in understanding echoing materials and others that absorb sound. Another sense that was underutilized in many of the pods was taste. Although some students added areas to collect tea, mints, or chocolates, others were hesitant to add food or drinks or just didn't bother to, no matter how much I made the suggestion. I do think taste is likely the least consistently utilized of the senses in interior design, and often it is inappropriate to incorporate it in many designs. So I do understand the hesitation as a matter of unfamiliarity with this sense. I would like to highlight one other project in order for you to better understand the online critique and the jurors' reactions so that you can fully appreciate the experience and process. Sarah's design is featured on this slide. She was designing for restaurant workers who have enough stress under normal circumstances, but of course had incredible stress as essential workers in the fall. Her concept centered around the idea that when someone is under pressure, they need a space where they can relax, think, and grow, a space that reflects the different layers that humans hold within themselves. As users explore this pod, they come to understand that it has layers also, and various places where they can perform activities to release their stresses. Her upper level was bright and airy, a place for exercise. It was filled with the smell of lavender and with the sound of running water. The lower level was meant to simulate going underwater, and in fact, it was next to the river and provided actual views below the surface. This dark, cozy area was a space of reflection and calm. The entire environment was a textural joy for visitors. Sarah's presentation was fairly typical of many of the students, with sensory interactions being discussed throughout the presentation. The information shown was unveiled with the jurors, asking them to feel, smell, and rub the enclosed items that were in the vessel she had painted black at the bottom with a gradation of paint as it moved to the top, representing the layers of her space. The following video shows the sensory interactions being enjoyed by the jurors, our would be clients for the evening. Their excitement in each reveal is quite clear, I believe.
So then this is a perspective of my bottom floor. Um, it's pretty dark and there's a space to look out at the fish since it's underwater, or you can sit and read in this back space here. These stone ivy hangings are actually attached to the structures above and they filter in a little daylight as well. So now you can take the interaction back. So take out the next layer. And for this one, the color is supposed to represent the color of the wood that's on my water feature. So it's kind of like as you're walking down the stairs. And if you pull off the thing that's Velcroed onto it and open it up.
Wow, what is this?
What is it?
It's water. It's water. So you just like, if you just like flick it on you, water like squirts out. And it's supposed to replicate the feeling of like if water was kind of spraying on you as you're walking down the stairs.
I'm sorry, did you say you had like a misting element there or something in the stairs?
The feature is right next to the stairs, like right along it. So as you're walking down, I'd imagine that like it would kind of like you'd get sprayed a little bit. So for the next one, what you're gonna do is there's a little light and you're gonna
Having fun with this. Sorry, I don't get out much. This is really exciting.
So if you take that jar and the light and you twist the light clockwise, it should turn on. And then put it inside the jar.
Inside the jar.
And then if you kind of just move it around, that's like kind of how you would feel if you were sitting in the window and the light's like reflecting underwater.
Stand by.
Oh my goodness. It's like a little nightlight.
Yeah.
much more effective with the lights out in the space. It's so cool.
Oh,
Yeah.
anyway, it's,
Yeah, so since my space is dark, that's what I'd imagine it would like look like if you were looking out underwater.
Hmm.
very cool.
And then for the next one, this is just like the same color as my flooring material, which is a polished concrete. Um, so it feels like cold and stuff along your hands, and it kind of gives it more of like a cavey underwater feel, I think, like just like the coldness of it and the smoothness. And then the next one is my like seating material. It's just like a leather, so it's pretty like soft and smooth.
I really love how your vessel is dark on the bottom and then it gets light. That's just
Thank
Yeah,
you.
really interesting.
so cool.
And then the last one is just like pieces of moss. So since I have like ivy and moss like in the space, that's like what it would feel like.
This is quite an assortment of objects here.
I know. It's a lot.
No, and the layers like you created. So I don't know if y'all can see, but here's the vessel that it came in. And each layer that she introduced is separated by this piece that has little instructions on it. But then it's like a trifle, you know, like a dessert where there's layers and layers and layers going up. And each one you pull it out and then there's something new to look at. So
Yeah.
it's like this constant like earth stratification, like going down like layers. Very, very cool.
Thank
Very
you.
cool.
Very
Very
cool.
cool. Yeah.
As you can see from the video, the feedback from the jurors was overwhelmingly positive. They were so much more invested than during a typical presentation, and their smiles and laughter just echoed through the microphones, and the wonder of exploration as they explored the sensory interactions made it clear that this was not just another critique. Imagine your jurors, your clients engaged in such a manner. It was honestly even more investment than I see from clients during an in person presentation, and I believe this process has infinite possibilities on many levels throughout the field. According to the process rubrics, it was noted that students were very successful or extremely successful in delivering a more than typically engaging experience in almost 90% of the projects, proving that the project was successful from a learning objective point of view as well. I truly hope that these methodologies can act as a blueprint for both virtual educational projects and business meetings in this ever changing world, narrowing the communications gap in both local and global design communities of tomorrow. My email address is shown here. If you have any follow up questions, please do not hesitate to get in touch. Thank you so much for your time. I wish you a wonderful day.